Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I remember when I first heard about Airbnb and I thought to myself, would I really let strangers rent my place and stay here when I wasn't around just to make a couple extra bucks? And I thought, I can't imagine this will be a big thing, but turns out it became a big thing. And I know there are people out there who, for instance, will buy a piece of property or an apartment or something simply to use it as an Airbnb. But I'm talking about where somebody actually uses their own house and they go someplace to let someone else stay there. But there have been some stories about people abusing Airbnbs. And in fact, if you go back to the very beginning, there's some really ugly ones at the very, very start of that company. So it's interesting that these kind of things can still be happening. A whole bunch of people sent me this story from Fox News. Andrew Miller wrote it. Philadelphia man sues Airbnb after a squatter changed the locks and rented out the property and causes extensive damage. So the man put his property on Airbnb, somebody rented it, and then they changed the locks and started renting it out themselves. They were sub-Airbnb-ing, apparently. Pennsylvania man is taking legal action against Airbnb, and he says they're responsible for over $100,000 in damages and lost income caused by a squatter on his property because the man also overstayed what he had paid for. The man is a landlord in South Philadelphia. He alleges in a lawsuit filed in late March that he rented out his residence through Airbnb to an individual who then squatted for 3 months and significantly damaged the property. The man claims that he listed his property on Christian Street and believed that Airbnb vetted prospective guests and led plaintiff to believe it was responsible for the safety of the host's property from any damage caused by the guest to the host's property. And it would be responsible for any overstay of the guests beyond the time reserved and paid for by the guest. So he thought Airbnb would take care of those things. He says those things then happened, and now he's suing them because he says they didn't do those things, according to the lawsuit. Now, according to the lawsuit, a person made a reservation for a one-night stay on June 13th, 2020, and Airbnb collected the rent for the one-night stay. On June 14th, the suit claims that the man refused to leave the property and stayed there until the landlord was able to obtain a court order to remove him in September of 2020. The man, meanwhile, is alleged to have changed the locks and rented out the other 2 apartments to 4 to 6 people per apartment and collected rent from those individuals. So apparently the property was several apartments, I guess. So that's part of it. Meanwhile, the tenant and the occupants that the tenant had allowed to live in the property did extensive damage to the interior and exterior of the property, including but not limited to damaging the furniture, piling up to 5 feet of trash on the sidewalk outside the front and back of the property, defacing the exterior walls, breaking doors and windows, breaking water pipes, breaking appliances, breaking bathroom fixtures, breaking the banister on the stairs, breaking the fire alarms, damaging the walls and floors, and breaking the patio railing. These people were a little rough on the property. Additionally, the landlord says he was physically attacked when he tried to access the property, and one of the occupants struck him with a baseball bat in his head and stomach and threatened to kill him if he ever came back. It's his property. The people who are there illegally say that they will harm him if he comes back. Meanwhile, he claims that his calls to Airbnb as the crisis unfolded were not returned, and letters from his legal counsel likewise were not answered. It was not until August of 2020 that defendant Airbnb finally acknowledged the communications, but did nothing to remove the squatter from the property or to address the damage done to the property. The first and most obvious question I have is that when somebody logs into this system and says, I want to stay in this residence here, and I'll pay for one night. Well, if they overstay, can't Airbnb just keep charging their card? I mean, that's what any other business would do, I would think. The suit claims the damage to the property was so extensive that it took the landlord until December of 2021 to make the repairs necessary to make it rentable again. He's seeking $170,000 in lost rental income and repair costs, plus interest, attorney fees, and other costs incurred by the squatter. And this apparently has become an increasingly significant problem across the U.S. in recent years. We've talked about that before, just not in the Airbnb context. So there has been a problem, especially during COVID, where somebody'd be in a place, they'd stop paying rent, and if you went to court, Obviously, there's a moratorium in some states saying that you couldn't kick somebody out that easily during COVID. But people go into court and go, yeah, but this person's not even a tenant. They simply moved in without my permission. And some courts would actually say, well, technically it's a landlord-tenant problem because you're trying to evict somebody from... And a lot of people were frustrated by that. And I understand that. But here is the first time I've heard of it, where somebody actually went in through Airbnb and got inside legally, paid for some of their time there, albeit one day, and then overstayed their welcome for quite some time. And then, to add insult to injury, had also brought in other people, sublet it, and made money that way. Spokesperson for Airbnb told Fox News Digital that the company does not comment on pending litigation, but said that the landlord has been banned from hosting on Airbnb since July 2020 due to frequent violations of our community standards and practices. So, according to this, the landlord has been banned from Airbnb, and they say that he has done something wrong, but it's unclear what because they didn't say. They're not going to comment on the pending litigation. Some people are bound to ask, could you sue the person who came in and paid the one-night rent and then stayed around? Of course you could. And you could also sue the people that they sublet to. But as most of you will guess, that person's probably not around, and if they are, they're probably not collectible. But as I've mentioned before, in law school you take a class called Torts, and torts are the private wrongs that you sue other people over as opposed to the wrongs that the state prosecutes you for, okay? So if somebody dies, a person can be charged with murder. On the civil side of that, you might be able to sue somebody for wrongful death. So there's often a parallel between a tort and a criminal act, but torts are specifically the acts that there's a remedy for that you can file a lawsuit over. I'm oversimplifying this on purpose. And so a lot of times when you're in a case and you're looking at who can we go after here, who's responsible for this, quite often people tend to focus on the deepest pockets of all. They'll go, oh, well, there's a company here that we can go after. They're the ones with the deepest pockets. They're the ones who oversaw the situation. They're who we should go after. And many people, lawyers, will often overlook the fact that, but there's also other people here that you could go after, including the people who did it. And the person who does something wrong, a tort, is referred to as a tortfeasor. And I've mentioned, I think once or twice before, that I actually had a professor in law school, after having 2 or 3 students in a row get up and answer questions about a particular case, many of them would skip over the obvious person that you can sue, and that's the person who did it. And so the professor actually asked the class to chant along with him, you can always sue the tortfeasor. You can always sue the tortfeasor. You can always. And so I can remember some of the cases that we read where a guy goes to see a concert, and at the concert, the allegation is that he got a little unruly. He says he didn't. But meanwhile, one of the security guards hired, by the venue, drags him out, injures him in the process. And of course, you sue the venue because they're the ones with all the money. What about the guy who actually did it, though? And so you might say, but Steve, if they're not collectible, why do you put them in there? You put them in there for a couple of reasons. One of which is if you don't and you go to trial, there's a thing they often refer to as the empty chair. The empty chair. And so once in a while, as you might guess, a defense attorney might take a chair and put it at the end of his table and sit it there to prove a point and go, by the way, plaintiff sued a whole bunch of people here, but they didn't sue the person who did it. So for some odd reason, there ought to be somebody in this chair here. It ought to be the attorney for the security guard who did the beating up. But that person's not here. Why is that? Why is that? And you start focusing on this one person who's not there, and people start thinking, oh, wait a second. Of the people in this chain of liability, the one person who's most responsible is not here. So you do want to usually include them in the pleadings. And if they don't show up, you can default them. If they do show up, they got to defend themselves. But you're going to want to be able to avoid that argument later on where someone's going to say, hey, you sued everybody but the person who did it. So I don't know for a fact that they did not sue the person here who was the one who booked a one-night stay? Because obviously they must know who that person is. I'm assuming to have an Airbnb account, you got to give them some kind of information that probably checks out. But then again, if not, maybe Airbnb's got another issue. I don't know. Never used Airbnb. Never have. Not on either end of the equation. So fascinating story. A lot of people sent it to me. We'll see what happens. But as of right now, Philadelphia man is suing Airbnb after a squatter who did stay one night that he paid for changed the locks, rented out the apartment, and rented out the property, and caused extensive damage. From Fox News, and Andrew Miller wrote it. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. People do not decide to become extraordinary. They decide to accomplish extraordinary things.